All right, it looks like it's 12 o'clock. Let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It's good to be with you again for another edition of our program. Today, we've got a special one for you. It's special because today's guest speaker is actually in-house. That's right, Misty Buchanan, the Deputy Director for North Carolina's Natural Heritage Program, is here in the studio with me. That's very exciting. We haven't had a live guest presenter in a while. Well, live here for me. You're all watching out there on the YouTubes. But glad that you could be with us. And I'm going to bring Misty into the program in just a moment. Before that, I want to remind everybody that this program is interactive. So as we go throughout the program, even though the guest speaker is here in the studio with me, we're still going to take your questions. So make sure that you are dropping your questions and your comments into the chat on YouTube throughout the program, and certainly once we get into the audience Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. That way we can have a conversation not just between us here in the studio, but also with you out there watching. Now, this program is broadcast to you by us here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, hosted by me, Chris, but it's coordinated and organized by the folks in the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality. So today, between our broadcast, their organization, and our guest speaker, we've got a lot of government synergy happening today between the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and the Department of Environmental Quality, which is always a good thing to see. At least I think so. That's fun and exciting. So I think we should do this. We should learn a little bit more about North Carolina today. Again, today's guest speaker is Misty Buchanan. Misty is the Deputy Director for North Carolina's Natural Heritage Program. That's in the Division of Land and Water Resources, Land and Water Stewardship within DNCR. And Misty, I'll turn it over to you. I'm going to bring up your slides, and the show is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. Really appreciate the Office of Environmental Education inviting me here to talk about the work of the Natural Heritage Program. And we are a small government program whose mission is to inventory North Carolina's natural heritage and use the information to help establish nature preserves that will protect our natural heritage for future generations. But before I talk about the Natural Heritage Program, I would like to begin by first recognizing what a special place North Carolina is. Really, the work that we do in the Natural Heritage Program is all about learning about North Carolina and helping protect North Carolina. And so the work that we do reflects the wonderful nature of North Carolina. So as we are sitting in downtown Raleigh, as we are today, Raleigh is a beautiful city, but it is hard to remember sometimes how wonderful our natural areas are outside of this urban environment. And when we're sitting in traffic, maybe rush hour traffic, it's really easy to forget what a wonderful and diverse natural heritage we have here in our state. But North Carolina really is a great state. We have some superlatives all across the map. So North Carolina has the highest mountains east of the Mississippi River, and Mount Mitchell is our tallest mountain at 6,686 feet. And we have more than 50 peaks over 6,000 feet in North Carolina. And our very first state park was created to protect the spruce fir forest around Mount Mitchell more than 100 years ago. In the mountains, we have more species of plants in the North Carolina mountains than in any other similar area of similar size in North America. And we have more species of salamanders than any other place in the world. We have more old growth forests in North Carolina mountains than in any other Southern Appalachian state. And we have more than 1,400 varieties of flowering plants and 100 species of trees just in the Great Smoky Mountains. On the other end of our state, we have 322 miles of coastline, which is the second longest coastline on the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, we have the Venus flytrap, which only grows within an 80-mile radius of Wilmington, North Carolina. This is the home of the Venus flytrap, and Charles Darwin called the Venus flytrap one of the most wonderful plants on Earth. The majority of North Carolina's population is concentrated in our Piedmont. About 2/3 of our population is in the middle 1/3 of our state. And so we have quite a bit of urban areas in the center of our state, but our mountains and our coasts still retain much of our wonderful natural heritage, as well as many pockets of natural areas within our Piedmont. And we are still discovering new species in North Carolina. There's still so much out there that we don't know. So our biologists are out combing the wildlands of North Carolina to find out what is out there. And these, the 3 species shown on the photos here are 3 examples of species that were just recently described. On the left-hand side of the screen is dune blue curls. This is a plant that grows on our sand dunes along the coast. And it is a rare species, and it was described by Bruce Sorey, who is a retired botanist who worked with the Natural Heritage Program. On the right-hand side of the screen is another plant species that was described by Bruce Sorey, and that is streamhead lobelia, which was formally described in 2020, and this plant occurs in our sandhills. And then in the center of the screen is the Hickory Nut Gorge green salamander, which was just described in 2019 as a new species. And this salamander is only known from the Hickory Nut Gorge area of North Carolina, and it occurs in about 25 populations in that area. And it lives in the crevices of rocks and rock outcrops in Hickory Nut Gorge. Here in Raleigh, we have the wonderful Neuse River water dog, which is endemic to North Carolina, which means it only occurs here in North Carolina. And it lives in the Neuse and tar drainages. And you can see it has gills on the outside of its head. So it looks really interesting. And this species was listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a threatened species last year. And that recognizes the very restricted range of the species as well as its imperiled status. It really depends on having fresh, clean water in those rivers and streams where it lives. So when we think about plant diversity in North Carolina, we really have a wonderful diversity to work with. We have 5,000 approximately native species of plants. 969 of those species are rare and tracked by the Natural Heritage Program. So that's about 1/5 of our plant species in our state are considered to be very rare. We have 31 plant species that are endemic to North Carolina, which means they only grow in the wild here in our state. So it's up to us to make sure that those species thrive into the future. And we have 48 species that are known from less than 5 populations globally. So for each of those species, as I said, there are fewer than 5 populations. So those are really hovering on the brink of extinction. And all of those species really deserve special attention to make sure that they will persist and thrive into the future. And one of those species is shown here. This is the Butner barbarous buttons, which grows here in our Piedmont, and it also occurs in the Piedmont of Virginia. As far as we know, there are only 2 or 3 populations. And so we really keep an eye very closely on those populations to make sure they're doing well. And this species was also discovered by a Natural Heritage Program biologist, Harry LeGrand, who is also retired from the program currently. When we think about animal species in North Carolina, we have a similar situation. We have about 706 rare animal species that are tracked by the Natural Heritage Program. We have about 120 native mammals, 475 native bird species, and 115 species that are endemic to North Carolina. So that's about 3 times as many endemic animals compared with endemic plants. So our animal species that are endemic to the state tend to occupy just 1 or 2 stream systems or drainages or mountain ranges, and they can be very isolated from other similar species. Unfortunately, we have 25 species of animals that are thought to be extirpated from North Carolina. That means they historically occurred here, but we do not believe that they still live here. They're not extinct because they live somewhere outside of the state, but they historically occurred here and they're no longer here. So we want to try to prevent that from happening to other species. And one example of an endemic species is shown here, the Outer Banks king snake, and the photo was taken by Scott Pullman. And the species of snake occurs on our Outer Banks. And Scott was fortunate enough to find this when he was monitoring one of our nature preserves out along the coast. So back to the Natural Heritage Program. How do we know all these wonderful things about our state? It's because of the work of the Heritage Program biologists and all of our partners across the state who share information with us. So as I said, our mission is to survey our natural areas and use the information that we find to help establish nature preserves that will protect our natural heritage for future generations. And so we do this by, we have sort of 5 main areas where we work. So we have a team of field biologists. We have about 5 biologists currently who go out all across our state and survey our natural areas. They go out into wild places and they basically make a list of all of the plants and animals that they find, and they describe the natural communities. And then they bring that information back to the office and they enter it into our inventory. And so our inventory consists of a database where we have tabular information about each occurrence of rare species and each high quality natural community. And we also have maps showing where everything is in our state. And that's our natural heritage inventory. And all of that data allows us to prioritize which lands in our state are most important for protecting our natural heritage. And so we use our data to sort through and to find those areas, and then we share the information with all of our partners, anyone out there who will listen to us, to try to help get those places protected. And we work with voluntary landowners to establish dedicated nature preserves and registered heritage areas. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we work under the Nature Preserves Act later in the presentation. So going back to this idea of gathering and storing information. So we have our own team of field biologists. We also work very closely with biologists in other state and federal agencies, particularly with state parks, the Wildlife Resources Commission, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service. We also work very closely with researchers and students at universities across our state. And we even get data from websites currently like iNaturalist and museum databases. So we gather all this information and we roll it up into our standardized inventory, and then we share it back out there so everybody can work together to help identify and protect these natural areas. So the areas that we prioritize for conservation are called natural heritage natural areas. And these are essentially an area of land or water that is important for protecting North Carolina's biodiversity. And so when we identify these natural areas, they may be privately owned, they may be owned by a local government or a state or federal agency. And we work with whoever those landowners are to make sure that they're aware of whatever the natural resources are that are present at the site, and then to work with them to try to get the site protected or managed appropriately. So the map on this slide shows the natural areas that we have identified across our state, and they're also prioritized based on how important they are for protecting these rare species. The exceptional natural areas are shown in red. These are our highest priority areas. They tend to protect either a high collection of rare species or a very important population of one of our rare species. And so you can see we have a lot of these exceptional natural areas all across our state. We have them all throughout. Every county of our state has natural areas, but we really especially have them concentrated in the mountains and along the coast and in the sandhills. And in the Piedmont, the river systems really especially jump out as being important for our natural heritage for species like the Neuse River water dog that we talked about earlier. Well, you can find information about all of our work at our website, www.ncnhp.org. And we catalog the information that we learn through our natural heritage inventories in many reports that we can make available to the public. So historically, we've done our inventories by looking county by county through our county inventory program, where we would have 1 or 2 field biologists stationed in a county for 1 or 2 years. And they would spend all of that time surveying the natural areas, and then writing up a report about what makes that county special. And these reports are almost like a textbook of the ecology of each county. So the first half of the report describes what makes that county particularly unique ecologically. It talks about the rivers, the geology, the soils, if there are any mountain ranges in the county, anything ecologically that makes that area unique. And then the second half of the report, we describe each of the natural areas that we have identified that are important for conservation, and we explain what's there and why it's so important to protect. So we have inventories for 97 of our 100 counties. We've also done inventories regionally. So for example, we did a survey of the Roanoke River floodplain. So we ignored the county boundaries and we just stayed close to the Roanoke River, and we did a report on what makes that area so unique for North Carolina. So we have many different types of regional reports we've done. We also sometimes do specific surveys of particular areas, such as the Jordan Lake area or other Corps of Engineers lands or National Forest lands. So we have quite a bit of reports to choose from if you want to learn more about the natural heritage in your area. This slide just shows an example of what a natural heritage inventory report looks like. We don't have pictures, unfortunately, in our reports, but they're very good information with maps and text describing what is so special about a particular area. So the whole point of all of this inventory work is to try to establish nature preserves that will protect these natural areas for future generations. And we work with the Nature Preserves Act, which establishes two different types of nature preserves for North Carolina. We have registered heritage areas and we have dedicated nature preserves. So registered heritage areas are sites where the landowner has recognized the value of the land for conservation and has agreed to help manage it to protect whatever rare species or natural communities are present at the site. So we create registered heritage areas as a way of encouraging the landowner to protect those sites, but it's not a permanently binding agreement. It can be terminated by the landowner or the Natural Heritage Program. And when the land changes hands, if it's sold, then the agreement dissolves. But we have found that many of our registered heritage areas have persisted for 3 and more decades at this time. So some examples of our registered heritage areas include our federal national wildlife refuges, such as Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge and PD. We also have registered heritage areas at Croatan-Pocosins, for example, and many sites within our national forests, both at the Croatan and in Pisgah and Nantahala and Uwharrie National Forests. Closer to my home, Duke Forest, which is owned by Duke University. They're registered heritage areas. Other examples include Roan Mountain Massif, Yadkin River Bluffs, and all across our state, we have about 750,000 acres within our registered heritage area system. Now, dedicated nature preserves are a permanent form of land conservation, and this is our highest form of land conservation. These agreements are made between the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources and the landowner, and they go through several layers of approval, including our governor and council of state have to approve the dedicated nature preserves. And that really sets those areas aside for conservation permanently. Some examples of dedicated nature preserves include Grandfather Mountain, Kitty Hawk Woods Coastal Reserve, and all of our coastal reserve system includes dedicated nature preserves. Green Swamp is an example of a privately owned nature preserve. This is managed by the Nature Conservancy. And we also have dedicated nature preserves with several counties, including Mecklenburg County, just recently dedicated more than 2,000 acres of nature preserves voluntarily, including the McDowell Nature Center in Mecklenburg County. We're also working with Alamance County and other local governments across the state to create more dedicated nature preserves. At this time, we have about 450,000 acres, including many sites that you're probably aware of, many state parks, many game lands, state forests that are in this nature preserve system. You can learn all about which lands are nature preserves by going to our website. We have several tools that are available. One tool on our website that I think is especially interesting is our species search page. This page allows you to enter the name of a species that you might want to learn more about. And the website will return a list of the counties where that species occurs, Or alternatively, you could search for a county and get a list of all the rare species that are in your county. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do with this page. In this example, I did a search for Venus flytrap to learn where Venus flytrap occurs in North Carolina. And you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a list of counties where the species occurs and county status. So in this example, you can see Pender and New Hanover County currently have Venus flytraps. Moore County is a historical county, so we know that flytraps occurred there in the past, but they have not been seen there in more than 30 years. Same with Lenore County and Robeson County. So there's a lot of interesting information here on our website. And if you move your mouse over and click on the species name, you can create a map showing those counties where the species currently and historically occurs, as well as some information about the federal and state status. So this species is considered threatened in North Carolina, but does not have a federal status at this time, and a little bit of information about the habitat where the species occurs. We also have maps, interactive maps that you can zoom into a particular area and find out what nature preserves are near you or what natural areas. So this is what our map looks like. Along the left-hand side of the screen, you can check the boxes beside the data that you want to see. Managed areas are those areas in the state that are managed in some way for conservation. So it does include our national forests, our state parks, our game lands, and our natural areas are the sites that we think would be important for protecting, but they're not necessarily protected yet. Our website also allows you to enter an address just like you would in Google, and you can zoom right into a particular location and then turn on the data for that area to see what is known from that area. So just as an example here, I've zoomed into one of the new Mecklenburg County dedicated nature preserves. This is McDowell Nature Preserve, and this shows you the area that is protected area in the little map. And I should point out that our managed areas and our natural areas are not necessarily open to the public. So before you visit one of these sites, you do need to do a little bit more research and find out if the site is actually open to the public before you try to visit. So one of the interesting things about having all this data available to us is we're able to search our database and ask questions. For example, in this case, I've asked which sites in North Carolina have the most rare species and the most high quality natural communities. So basically we're trying to figure out which natural areas you could think are most important for protecting a rich concentration of rare species. And this is our top 25 list on the slide here. We have identified almost 2,400 natural areas across our state that are important for conservation. So this top 25 list is the best of the best. So at the top of the list, Great Smoky Mountains National Park should not be a surprise to anyone. This site is 400,000 acres. It's our largest natural area that we've identified. And of course, we know so much about the park because of the inventory work that's been done by National Park Service staff, biologists. Number 2 on our list might surprise people. It's Fort Bragg Central Section. Fort Bragg is the world's largest military base. And it also is a very important place for conservation in North Carolina. And many people don't know that the Department of Defense is not just out there protecting our country, they're also protecting our natural heritage. And we work very closely with biologists at Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune to identify where those natural areas are and make sure that they're inventoried and managed appropriately. We also have number 3 on our list is Roan Mountain Massif, all the way on the other end of our state, right at the edge of Tennessee. And this site is part of Pisgah National Forest, and it is managed as a special interest area by the National Forest. And they do recognize the incredible value of those grassy balds and high elevation rock outcrops for rare species. Going on down the list, you're probably seeing some sites that are familiar to you. Many of these sites I would consider to be bucket list sites for North Carolina. These are great places to go visit. Green Swamp, Holly Shelter Game Land, Linville Gorge. But some of these sites are not open to the public. So once again, if you want to go visit, definitely do some research online and find out if they're available to the public and where the trails are. But these are great places to go visit. So how do these sites get protected? Well, the Natural Heritage Program works very closely with the North Carolina Land and Water Fund to identify the sites that are most important for conservation and help prioritize these for conservation. So the Land and Water Fund is a state-funded program which awards grants for land conservation, restoration, and planning. And they depend on appropriations from our state legislature each year. And this past year, the Land and Water Fund awarded $60 million worth of grants for land conservation and restoration and planning. And that will protect 51,000 acres of land, 33 miles of waterways. It's really been a great year for conservation in North Carolina. And this slide shows a partial list of some of the projects that were funded by the Land and Water Fund this past year. And once again, these are adding on to some sites that were previously protected, and some of these are establishing new nature preserves. For example, the Pisgah View State Park is on the list. This is a new state park that will be created in Buncombe County. There are also many sites that are near and dear to many hearts of North Carolinians. Some of the awards last year will protect more land around Grandfather Mountain, also many waterways across our state, and this will help increase the resilience and reduce flooding for other downstream areas in the future. We've got land along the Cape Fear River, Deep River, Roanoke River. So wonderful places across the state are being protected by the land trust and the local governments and the state agencies who were awarded funding from the Land and Water Fund last year. And Land and Water Fund is currently reviewing applications for the award cycle that will be ending in September when they award their grants. So the Natural Heritage Program also does special projects based on additional funding that we get from our partners who recognize the value of having natural heritage biologists conducting surveys out there. So some special projects we're working on right now are shown on the slide. Carolina Hemlock Status Survey is a project that we are kicking off right now. In this case, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approached us and asked if we'd be interested in doing a status survey for Carolina Hemlock. Carolina Hemlock is a species of tree that only lives in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. Many people are aware of Canada hemlock, which it also occurs here in North Carolina. It grows all the way up into Canada. But the Carolina hemlock really just occupies a very small range. And both species of hemlock are currently being attacked by the hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an invasive exotic pest. And we're very concerned about Carolina hemlock because it does have a much more limited range. And we want to make sure the species does not go extinct while we're out here. Other status surveys we've recently conducted, we're doing a survey of mountain pitcher plant, and we're just wrapping up a status survey of Venus flytrap, which took place over 3 years, where our field biologist, Lori Heyman, as well as a whole team of biologists working with her, went out and surveyed every population we could get to on public land and all of the private lands where we could get permission to survey. And once again, we're just trying to make sure that the species is thriving in the wild and that it will persist for future generations. We also work very closely with our national forests, who have funded some surveys in each of the 4 national forests in North Carolina over the last 4 years. And we're also getting ready to start an inventory of the area around the Northern Peaks State Trail, which is going to be a brand new hiking trail that will go from Boone all the way up to West Jefferson. And we were funded with an appropriation from the General Assembly last year to help work with state parks to identify where the trail may be established in this area without trampling on any rare plants or animals along the way. So we'll be working very closely with the state parks trail planners to identify a potential corridor and then walk that whole area to help make sure the trail is routed in a way that it can be safe for hikers and also safe for our plants and animals that live in that area. So before I wrap up, I'm just going to share a story about how I came to work with the Natural Heritage Program. I grew up in Western North Carolina in McDowell County, and I grew up in the house that my dad grew up in, out in the country. We lived away from people. We didn't see any other neighbors from our house. We just said forest and trees. And as I said, we were out in the country, but Short Off Mountain was a local landmark that we could see all around that area. And Short Off Mountain is a mountain that is at the very end of Linville Gorge. And if you live in McDowell County or Burke County, you're very familiar with this because you can see Short Off for miles around. And so Short Off Mountain was always, I would consider it part of my natural heritage. It was just sort of the backdrop of my daily life. And I thought I knew Short Off. I was very familiar with it. But when I went away to graduate school and studied botany at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, I learned that there was a plant species that occurred there called mountain golden heather, which is shown in this slide here. And mountain golden heather occurs only on the high peaks around Linville Gorge in McDowell and Burke counties and nowhere else in the world. It's endemic to the Linville Gorge area. And when I learned about that, I was so surprised because I thought I knew everything there was to know about Short Off Mountain and really Linville Gorge. But I felt like it was a big surprise to me that this wonderful little species was there. It occurs nowhere else in the world. It did make Short Off that much more special to me, but it also made me feel like I felt like somebody should have told me about that plant before now. I was really surprised. And so one thing that occurred to me was that people shouldn't have to go away to graduate school to learn about their natural heritage. We should have this information available to all North Carolinians so that we can learn about our natural heritage. And I feel like it'll make us appreciate it that much more. So that became part of my mission, is to learn more about what's out there all across our state and to help make that information available to the people of North Carolina so that we can really celebrate and appreciate our natural heritage. So I've been very fortunate to work with the Natural Heritage Program where we all share this mission. But we still have a lot more to do. We're still learning about our state. A few years ago, we got a call from a 5th grader who had a homework assignment to find out how many animal species live in North Carolina. And he found his way to call us, and we told him we'd have to get back to him on that because it turns out we really don't know how many animal species live in North Carolina. We have a pretty good idea of how many vertebrates and mammals and animals live here, but we really don't know how many species of spiders, how many beetles, worms. There's so many species we really know very little about, and we're still discovering new species each year. But one thing we do know is the population of North Carolina is growing steadily. Since the Natural Heritage Program was created in 1976, the population of North Carolina has almost doubled, all the way from 5.6 million to 10.7 million people, and we're still growing. And so as more and more people move to our state and as our population expands, we're competing for those natural areas with the plants and animals that also call our state home. So that's why the work that we do to document our natural heritage and to help get it protected is so important. So I'm going to stop there, and we do have plenty of time for questions and discussion.
Let's give Misty a great big round of applause. Excellent stuff. And what a fabulous presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So everybody, I'll remind you, if you've got questions for Misty, your questions and get answers to them all. And I think to get us started, I'm kind of curious how the Natural Heritage Program fits into the diversity of nature and environmental organizations that we have in North Carolina. Like you showed like a huge list of federal lands and private lands and nature preserves, but there's also, the Wildlife Resources Commission is out there with biologists doing surveys and tracking wildlife. Here at the museum, we have, collections managers and research curators who are out surveying and looking and studying wildlife. Mm-hmm. So how do all of these things fit together from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. We are so lucky in North Carolina because we have a really wonderful community of biologists who work together. As you said, all across our state, we have many different agencies with field biologists. And we also have a really wonderful conservation community who is working hand in hand with our field biologists. We go out and find these places, and then our land trusts and our state agencies work with us to help get these areas protected. But we do work especially closely with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, which is the agency that is charged with protecting animal species. They administer the Endangered Species Act for the state for animals. We also work very closely with the North Carolina Plant Conservation Program, which is within the Department of Agriculture, and they administer our Plant Protection Act. And so they all use our data, and whenever they're evaluating species, they use our data to help verify whether a species is considered to be rare, whether it's declining, and they also contribute data to us. So they share information with us, we share information with them, we work very closely together. It's a really great network here in North Carolina.
Excellent stuff. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So question from the chat. Why are we missing 3 counties inventory since you mentioned 97 are done?
Yes. Well, there are 3 counties we have not completed yet. We're still working on those. The Natural Heritage Program historically received quite a bit of funding from the Natural Heritage Trust Fund. And that trust fund really funded a lot of our inventories, along with counties and land trusts who worked with us. And we had a reorganization of that trust fund a few years ago. And the Natural Heritage Trust Fund was merged with the Land and Water Fund. And county inventory is no longer one of the priorities of that funding source. So we've kind of turned our attention in other areas, but we are still out there inventorying our state, and we do hope to complete those 3 counties eventually.
Excellent stuff. And so, like, I'm curious, I'm going to be headed this summer out and I'm going to be camping along the Blue Ridge for 9 days.
Okay.
I'm starting in Cherry Lane, North Carolina, and going all the way down past Cherokee.
Okay.
Over the course of more than a week. Is like your website, is that something, should I like really dive in to try to get a sense for the plants and like I want to look for the plants and animals, that's
Sure,
where
yeah.
we're going. Is like that the kind of thing, should I use like a naturalist? How should I, like, if I really want to get a sense of like what to look for, but also not, damage or destroy habitats?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question.
How can I use this resource?
Right. So what I would do myself is one thing you can do is you can go to our map and you can zoom into the areas where you're going to be camping, say, for example, and you can see what natural areas are near that area. And then I would go to the county inventory for that county and read about the ecology of the nearest natural area. And that will give you some information about what the natural communities are like, what rare species are there, as well as a little bit about what you can expect from the topography and the geology and everything. So that's what I would do. I would kind of use a combination of sources there.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to really dive into these county inventory reports and to really get a sense for what it's like.
That works for me.
Okay, I like it. Okay, next one from the chat. How often are historically recorded plants or animals, quote, rediscovered?
It does happen, yes. I think one of the most important things is for anyone who's out there can rediscover a rare plant or animal. You just have to be curious about it. So much of it really just depends on a person being curious to learn more about what's out there. So what you can do is if there's a plant or animal that you've never seen before, if you try to figure out what it is, iNaturalist can be a really helpful resource. Just last year, we had a species of Scutellaria, which is a little wildflower here in Wake County that was rediscovered by someone who was not a professional field biologist, but they were participating in a BioBlitz here in Wake County. And they found a picture of it, they put it on iNaturalist, and we worked with UNC Herbarium, Alan Weekly, and Jamie Amoroso here in the Natural Heritage Program to identify that it was a rediscovery of a historical species for Wake County, where we have tons of biologists working. So it can happen, and it's pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, that is cool. just to add that a BioBlitz too, right? Where
exactly.
The whole idea is to get people together and find things.
Yep.
Find the nature. That's great. Let's see. Marty wants to know what's your favorite or most unique or surprising recently discovered species?
recently discovered species. Well, I think that it's really interesting for me when animals are discovered because generally speaking, especially vertebrates, there are not as many species of vertebrates in North Carolina as there are plants, and I'm a botanist. So I really thought the Hickory Nut Gorge green salamander was a really great discovery, and especially because there has been in the past 20 years in North Carolina a huge amount of conservation work in Hickory Nut Gorge with our state park. When Chimney Rock became a state park, we're getting our state parks involved and working with the local land trusts in the area. So it's really great when new species are discovered in areas that already have some conservation happening.
Exciting. Carrie writes, you mentioned that a fifth grader wrote to you about the number of species in North Carolina. Do you have resources that are kid-friendly that are open for teachers to use with students?
Most of our information is not geared towards children. We have in the past worked with the North Carolina Encyclopedia. I can't remember what it's called exactly. It's called Encypedia, and it's online. And we have provided some information to Encypedia that is kind of more geared towards children.
Okay, there you go. Encypedia. That's a great resource.
It is, yeah.
That's a great. I use that site all the time.
Oh, good.
To help me learn about stuff in the state. Okay, let's see. Lisa writes, the Museum of Natural Science educators, oh, thank you, do a great job of educating students and other educators about our natural heritage. How can we help teachers do the same?
That sounds like a better question for
the educators here at the museum. Maybe that was a question for me. Lisa, is that question for me? Well, I was looking at Carrie's question and then Lisa's question. I was thinking about how we could use some of these. And that trip to the Blue Ridge that I'm taking this summer is with a group of North Carolina teachers, North Carolina educators. The idea is to immerse them in nature and, new perspectives that they can then take back in their classroom. So North Carolina teachers are taking North Carolina nature lessons back home.
Oh, that's great.
As well as just getting inspiration from the natural world for their classrooms. So resources like what you've got are useful because one, as facilitators, I'm going to dive into these reports and try to figure out what are the really exciting things to talk about to bring North Carolina's natural history home to, statewide. But then teachers also have access to the maps and the species lists. And maybe for slightly older students, but there's a lot of data crunching and investigation that Natural Heritage Program has made the information available. Here's a list of species and their occurrences. Now let's ask some really exciting questions about the data, right? So you can get into a classroom and say, let's learn about, new species that have been discovered and where they occur in North Carolina. Okay, why do they occur here? How could they become new species? What about these natural and protected areas? If we're looking at rare and endangered species that have, where were they in 1976 and where are they today? You showed us historical records.
Right.
And if we were looking at the Venus flytrap example, right, we've seen a shrinkage in the number of counties where they're found today. So the range is decreasing. Why is that happening? You can get into so many exciting questions that connect science and nature together with things that are in our own statewide backyard.
That's true. That's a very good point. It's a really good jumping off point for more discovery. We give you a lot of basic information about our natural heritage, and I think the information that we share leads you to ask more and more questions and dig deeper.
I love it. Let's see. Carrie went on to write, they asked this question because they've had students do a bio blitz and they learn about the species that they found. It's difficult for them to digest much of what they find online.
Right, sure. Yeah, that's a good point. This is something we are always working to try to stay relevant and to speak to new audience as new technologies emerge. One website that I think is really helpful is the North Carolina Biodiversity website, which has pictures and maps and descriptions of all of the species of plants and animals that occur in the state. And I use that website very frequently whenever I learn about a new plant or if I want to find out where a particular plant or animal occurs in the state, I'll go to that website and it shows counties and even more information. That includes common species as well as rare species.
More great resources. And there's all kinds of like connecting happening in the chat right now, which is great.
Great.
Carrie, we're going to get you natural history resources one way or another. Look up Educators of Excellence at the Museum of Natural Sciences. You should sign up and go on our trips. Okay, let's see. Other questions from the chat. I'm going to do a quick look on Facebook too for viewers there. Is there a way for people to keep up with the work of the Natural Heritage Program to see what sort of new information or updates are coming out of that? Because across the state, right, we all pretty much live close to natural areas.
Absolutely.
In North Carolina. We're fortunate in that way to protected natural areas too.
Yes, we do have a Facebook page and Twitter page as well. So we do try to post, we post regular information about natural areas across our state from our county inventories, just to let people know about particular natural areas. And then when we have news to share about new nature preserves, we also post that information. So that's probably the best way to learn about current work that we're doing.
Excellent stuff. Well, Misty, thanks for being on the Lunchtime Discovery Series.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great.
Excellent presentation and lots of great resources for everybody to take advantage of. So everybody, thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning into today's program. We will be back here next Wednesday at noon with another edition of the Lunchtime Discovery Series. I hope that you can tune in. Go ahead and mark your calendars and get ready for it. You can visit the Office of Environmental Education online at eenorthcarolina.org, where you can see lots of resources, events, and opportunities related to environmental education across the state, as well as their EE certification program. And then you can see upcoming programs and events just like this one from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences at our website, naturalsciences.org. And from both of those places, you can make the leap onto our social media platforms where you can get more information and, you know, keep in touch with what's going on out of these cool places in state government, because like between DNCR and DEQ, you know, don't tell Roy Cooper, but I think we're the best part of state government. We do the cool sciencey nature stuff. And so that's the most fun. If you're asking my personal opinion, like I said, though, don't tell Roy Cooper I said that. Shouldn't have said that on camera. Until next time, everybody, take care, stay safe, and I don't know, it's nice outside. Maybe go get some of that fresh air and green that we've got all across the state of North Carolina, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye, everybody.